Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and AP English, and we turn now in our study of the Iliad to book 17. Menelaus's finest hour is the way that Robert Fagles will translate this title. The fight for Patroclus's armor and, of course, his corpse. Let's work quickly with a summary review of where we've been. Go to learnstrong.net if you haven't been following my lectures. Find that AP folder, and down the left-hand side in the AP folder, then once you're there, you can see all of our lectures here for the first 16 books. Really quickly, in book 1 we've got the invocation of the muse, and of course Achilles versus Agamemnon. In book 2 we have Agamemnon's bad dream, as we call it, with the catalog of the ships and chariots. In book 3 we've got Paris fighting Menelaus, and of course Menelaus defeating Paris, and we think that maybe the war is over. In book 4, Hera and Zeus have their exchange, and Hera will convince Pandarus the Trojan to shoot at Menelaus, and now the war is back on. In book 5, Diomedes Aristeia, that Aristeia is a word, that battle type, right? He will, in fact, Diomedes will wound both Aphrodite and Ares in book 5. In book 6, pivotal book for us, Hector in Troy, with Andromache his wife and Astyanax his boy. In book 7 we have Ajax fighting against Hector. They come to a standoff, ultimately to a truce. In book 8 we have Zeus and his famous scales, and the decision is made that the Trojans and Hector will ascend and will jack the Greeks. In book 9 we have the embassy to Achilles. Agamemnon, using Nestor as his guide, sends Odysseus, Phrynox, and Ajax to say, hey, come back, we'll give you the world. He says no. And I did a review of books 1 through 9. I called it Achilles' crisis of faith. And here in this lecture I argue that Achilles rejecting Time, that is to say Scooby snacks, the honors that are due warriors, and Kleos, or glory, is going to then basically reject the warrior's code, and that's a pivotal moment in our study of the Iliad. In book 10 we have Diomedes and Odysseus doing their night raid into the Trojan lines. They jack Dole and they steal some ponies. In book 11 we have Agamemnon's Aristeia. Achilles is watching. He sends Patroclus to go and find Nestor. That, of course, is significant because Achilles ultimately will sit at home and wait for news of Patroclus, and it's going to be bad news. In book 12 we have the Trojans at the trench and at the wall, and of course Hector's famous boulder. In book 13 we have Poseidon as Celchus, who is going to encourage the Greeks, and Hector, who will ultimately taunt Paris. And at the end of book 13 we have Hector's famous scream. In book 14, a famous book that joins, of course, sex and violence together, we have Hera seducing Zeus so that Ajax can then jack Hector with a boulder. And in book 15, Zeus will wake up and he's very upset. He will tell Poseidon that he has to stop. He will tell Apollo to heal Hector, and the Trojans will continue their fighting and their jacking. In book 16, really important, we have the death of Sarpedon by Patroclus and Patroclus's Aristeia. And then, of course, at the end of book 16, we have the death of Patroclus at the hands of Hector. Well, all of that now is going to bring us now to book 17. Now, again, the hope is you're doing your own annotative work here and using me then as supplement. Our learning theory, again, will remind you that we are working, always trying to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. And we do that in our annotative process at level 1 by answering the question, what does the text say? At level 2, what does the text mean? At 2A, themes, messages. At 2B, we're concentrating on symbol irony. We're going to point out some really important ones here. And then finally at level 3, how can I relate to this text? 3A, relate to other texts. 3B, relate to me personally. Let's do a real quick, brief outline of book 17 and then get to the language of the poem. In this book, really, we're fighting over Patroclus's body and his armor. Obviously, it's Achilles' armor, right? We have Menelaus, who will stand over the body of Patroclus, and he will, in fact, get vengeance because Euphorbus, who, of course, stabbed Paris in the back and then ran off, Euphorbus will taunt Achilles or Menelaus, and then Menelaus, in the end, will kill Euphorbus. No Trojan, however, wants to fight Menelaus. Again, Apollo, as this time Mentis, will spur on Hector. We've seen this as a motif. Menelaus is attacked by Hector and will in fact ask at line 100, what can I do? Menelaus then will leave Patroclus's body, and he will run after Ajax. Hector then will get Achilles' arm. He wants to decapitate Patroclus' body and feed the body to the dogs. Note the irony of this, of course. That is to say, ultimately, this is what's going to happen to Hector. Glaucus will challenge Hector about Sarpedon. He does not know that Sarpedon's body has been taken by Apollo away. And then we are told about the chaos of war. Hector will respond to Glaucus by saying, "Stand by me." He puts on Achilles' armor. That's a pivotal moment because Zeus is going to shake his head and he's going to say, "Death is right beside you, Hector." Zeus then will fit Achilles' armor to Hector, and these will be Hector's final battle scenes. Menelaus will scream to all the troops, "Don't let the dogs eat Patroclus' body," and the Greeks will form a ring around Patroclus' body. Again, we will have Ajax fighting against Hector. No two warriors in the Iliad ever have as many contests together that are memorable as do Ajax and Hector. Apollo then will spur Aeneas on, and we have this at line 450, enormous tug of war is the line. At line 466 then, Achilles, we find out, knows nothing about what's going on and hopes that Patroclus is still alive. Achilles' horses, he had 3 of them, one is killed, the other 2, the immortal horses, we're told, they weep for the fallen Patroclus and they won't budge. And we have an amazing set of lines from Zeus about those horses, and then finally Zeus won't permit Hector to have the horses. Hector wants those horses, right? Then we have Automedon's Aristeia. He will drive Achilles' horses. He will ultimately give them to Alcedon. He will kill Atreus. And he says, after he kills Atreus at line 615, "I am eased of the grief of Patroclus' ghost a little." Athena will spur on Menelaus. Apollo will spur on Hector. Zeus gives triumph to the Trojans. Ajax and Menelaus they realize that Zeus is in fact helping the Trojans. And finally, Ajax will say, "Someone has to tell Achilles that Patroclus is dead." And then he sends up a prayer at line 725 to Zeus. "Give us back our sight. There's been a mist that's been laid out. Give us the bright sky." Zeus does have pity on Ajax and the Greeks. Ajax is weeping at this point. And Ajax will suggest that Nestor's son, Antilochus, will in fact go and tell Achilles, your best pal is dead. Menelaus will then tell Antilochus to go and tell Achilles. And of course, we're told in line 787 that Antilochus hates this duty, as you can imagine, right? Going and telling Achilles. Achilles, Menelaus will point out, can't obviously fight without armor because he doesn't have any armor, obviously setting up Book 18 and the fact that Achilles needs armor. The Greeks ultimately do win Patroclus' body back and start bringing it back towards the ships. We're going to hear in the next book, however, that it's still a fight over the body of Patroclus. So the 2 Ajaxes, we're told, hold off the Trojans. Well, that's a review. Let's turn now to some of the lines that we want to pay closest attention to. The opening lines are compelling ones, so let's take a look. Opening lines of Book 17. "But Atreus' son, the fighting Menelaus, marked it all, the Trojans killing Patroclus there in the brutal carnage, and crested now in his gleaming bronze gear, Atrides plowed through the front to stand astride the body, braced like a mother cow lowing," another epic simile, "like a mother cow rowing over a calf, her firstborn, first labor pang she felt. So the red-headed captain bestrode Patroclus now, shielding his corpse with spear and round buckler, burning to kill off any man who met him face to face. But Euphorbus, who had stabbed Patroclus, who hurled a lethal ashen spear, would not neglect his kill. Patroclus' handsome body, halting close beside it, he taunted fighting Menelaus. 'Back, high and mighty Atrides, captain of armies, back from the corpse, and leave the bloody gear. I was the first Trojan, first of the famous allies to spear Menelaus down in the last rough charge. So let me seize my glory, Cleos, among the Trojans now, or I'll spear you too. I'll rip your own sweet life away." It will be at this point that Menelaus will respond, and Menelaus will say, he says, "I'll break your courage for you too if you try to take me on. Go back to your own rank and file, I tell you. Don't stand against me, or you'll meet your death. Even a fool learns something once it hits him. So he warned, but failed, we're told, to shake Euphorbus, who shot right back. Now, high and mighty Atrides, now by heaven, you pay in blood for the brother you laid low. You glory over it too, making his wife a widow, lost in the depths of the new bridal chamber, bringing his parents cursed tears and grief. But I could stop that wretched couple's pain, if only I brought your head in bloody armor home, and laid them in Pantheus' arms, in lovely Pantheus' arms. We're wasting time, our fight's unfought, untested. We'll see who stands its ground and cuts and runs. Menelaus now, of course, will have his Aristiad, right? Euphorbus will stab Menelaus' round steel full center, the brazen point bent to the tough armor. And then we're told, but the next turn, Menelaus rose with a bronze lance and a prayer to Father Zeus, and lunging out at Euphorbus, just dropping back, pierced the pit of his throat, leaning into it hard, his whole arm's weight in the stroke to drive it home, and the point went slicing through the tender neck. He fell with a crash, armor ringing against his ribs, his locks, like the Graces' locks, splashed with blood. And it will be at this point then that it will be over, and Menelaus cuts him down, stripping off his armor, right? It's at this point that then the Trojans will begin their attack on Menelaus, who's standing over the body of Patroclus. And it's at this point as well, obviously, that he is worried about what exactly it is that's going to happen. We're then told Apollo, at line 93, Apollo, a god of the wars of men, will stride, and grief bore down on Hector, packing his dark heart, as he scanned the battle lines and saw the worst at once. The two men there, one stripping the gleaming armor, the other sprawled on the ground, blood still spurting warm from his slashed throat. Down the front he charged, crested in flashing bronze, Hector loosing a savage cry. We have this a lot in the Iliad, don't we? This savage crying. And flaring on like fire, like the god of fire. Now this notion of the god of fire will come back in the next book when we see Achilles. The blaze that never dies. And the cry pierced Menelaus, deeply torn now as he probed his own great heart. Menelaus. The soliloquy of Shakespeare is born in the Iliad. We're going to see it several times here. For example, Menelaus speaking out loud to himself, "What can I do? If I leave the splendid gear and desert Patroclus, who fell here fighting, all to redeem my honor, won't any comrade curse me?" Obviously, he's thinking not just any comrade, but Achilles, right? "Seeing me break away." Let's point this out. The problem is going to be, okay, it's enough that Patroclus dies. You got to go back and tell Achilles that. But if you can't return with Patroclus's body, I mean, obviously the armor is now gone, so you're going to have to go back and tell Achilles you got no armor anymore. But to come back and say we got no body of your best friend Patroclus, yeah. "But if I should take on Hector and Hector's Trojans alone in single combat, trying to save my pride, wouldn't they encircle me, one against so many? This flashing Hector has all Troy at his back. But why debate, my friend? Why thrash things out? When you fight a man against the will of the gods, a man they have sworn to honor, then look out, the heavy wave of ruins about to overwhelm you. Surely no Achaean will curse me, seeing me now giving ground to Hector, since fighting Hector's flanked by God Almighty. Ah, if only I knew where Ajax could be found, that man with his ringing war cry. We two together would go back to the melee, calling up our fury, even fight in the teeth of every god on high, and haul the body back to Achilles somehow. Things are bad, but that would be worse. In other words, not having a body for Achilles would be a really bad thing, right? And it will be at this point then that we're told that Hector is going to actually take the armor of Achilles, and he'll get ready to put it on. At line 143, "So roused the fury in battling Ajax's heart, and down the front he stalked with the red-headed king. Hector, tearing the famous armor off Patroclus, tugged hard at the corpse, mad to hack the head from the neck with bronze, and dragged the trunk away to collect the dogs of war." Again, the ironies here grow deep, because this is exactly what Achilles will do to Hector here soon. "But in charged Ajax, shield like a tower before him, and Hector, falling back on crowd of comrades, leapt to his chariot, flinging the burnished gear to his waiting troops to haul away to Troy trophies to be his own enormous glory." Right? But Ajax, shielding Patroclus round with his broad buckler, stood fast now, and so we're told that we're going to have continuation of the body of Patroclus to be taken care of. We then have Glaucus, who is going to scowl at Hector in line 160, and he's going to say, "Hector, our Prince of Beauty in battle, a sham, that empty glory of yours, a runner's glory, a scurrying girls at that." So you got Hector, who's going to be accosted by Glaucus because there's been no proper burial yet or retrieval of Sarpedon's body. Obviously, Glaucus does not know what we know, and that is, of course, that Apollo has already taken this. He says, now you lack the daring to save Sarpedon from the dogs. So now, if any Lycian troops will obey my orders, home we go. Sounding, interestingly, like Achilles at the beginning of the poem, right? And headlong death can come and topple Troy, right? He says it. We ought to drag Patroclus' body back to Troy at once. That way we can ransom for Sarpedon and his body. For the man we cut down here was the royal friend of Prince Achilles, far the greatest among the Argive ships, and at his command go rugged fighters hand to hand. But you, with enemy war cries ringing in your ears, you lack the nerve to go up against the great Ajax, which is insane, because of course Hector's fought Ajax several times, right? That fierce heart, to look him straight in the eye and fight the man head on. He's a better man than you. This is a Trojan who is saying this to Hector. And the response then at line 200 or so is, Hector says, you fill me with contempt. What are you saying? You tell me that I can't stand up to monstrous Ajax. I tell you, I never cringe at war and thundering horses. By the will of Zeus, will always overpower the will of men. However, he says, come on, my friend, stand by me. Watch me work. See if I prove a coward dawn to dusk. Your claim, or I stop some Argive blazing in all his power from fighting on to shield Patroclus' corpse. So in other words, you have this interesting response then, and Hector's response to it, right, to Glaucus. We're then told at line 220 that Hector veered away from the heavy fighting and he went after Achilles' arms. Hector exchanged his armor, line 221, handling his own gear to his battle-hungry troops to return to holy Troy. He donned the deathless arms of Peleus' son Achilles, arms the gods of the sky once gave his loving father, and Peleus passed them on to his son when he grew old. But the son would not grow old in his father's armor. It's an interesting line. We are again reminded that Achilles will die here at the walls of Troy. Now when Zeus, who erased the cloud, saw Hector from afar, strapping on the gear of Peleus' godlike son, he shook his head. Notice this in distinction between bowing his head at the beginning of Iliad 1 to say, okay, I agree with that. As here it's shaking his head. Zeus is like, oh man, what is he doing? Think about it. Anybody that wears Achilles' armor, jacked. Patroclus wears Achilles' armor, jacked. Hector's going to wear Achilles' armor, jacked. Of course, ultimately Achilles himself. That armor stands as a symbol, doesn't it? It's the kiss of death. You wear that armor, you soon will die. And he not only shakes his head, but he addresses his own heart. So now we have a soliloquy of Zeus. Poor soldier. Sometimes translated as wretched soldier. Never a thought of death weighs down your spirit now, yet death is right beside you standing. You don the deathless arms of a great fighter, and all other fighters tremble before him, true. But you killed his comrade. Again, Patroclus is called gentle, strong, and against all rights. You ripped the immortal armor off his head and shoulders. So great power for the moment I will grant you to compensate for all that is to come. Never again will you return from battle, Hector, nor will Andromache take that famous armor, Achilles' deathless armor, from your hands. So Zeus decreed. And the son of Cronos bowed his craggy, dark brows. Now we do have head bowing. Zeus fitted the armor tightly on Hector's body, and Ares surged in his heart the awesome force, filling his limbs with power and fighting strength. And on he strode amidst his illustrious Trojan allies, calling out with wild cries, now flashing before them all in the gleaming battle gear of great-hearted Achilles. So we do have then Hector putting on the gear, Zeus's response. The next movement is Menelaus speaking to the Greeks at line 283. Menelaus, with a high-piercing shout, will call, friends, lords of the Argives, O my captains, all who join the Atridae, Agamemnon and Menelaus, who drink wine at the king's expense and hold command of all your own troops, your rank and fame from Zeus. Impossible now to pick you out, my captains, man by man. The battle blazes up so wildly. Forward, each on his own. You'll die of shame if the dogs of Iliad make Patroclus ripping sport. In other words, Menelaus is aware that we better get this body back, or we're going to have serious problems coming, right? Then we're told that the Greeks will fight in a ring at line 304, but the Argives face them, the Trojans, standing fast in a ring around Patroclus, one fury seizing their hearts, packing a wall of bronze shields, and round about their glittering crested helmets now, the son of Cronos spread a dense, deepening mist, so they can't see very well. And it will be this that will hold off the ravening dogs of Troy, as we will hear about it, okay? Our next set of lines that I want us to turn to will be specific to Apollo, who is going to say to Aeneas, hey, let's get to work at line 380. Aeneas, how could you and your men save Troy with the gods against you? I've seen other men who trust to their own power and striking force, their own valor, their own troop strength, even badly outmanned, defend their country well, but Zeus is with us here, decreeing triumph for us, not for the Argives now. But you're all frightened out of your minds. You cannot fight. And of course, this taunting to make a warrior fight even harder is standard protocol, right? We then have Ajax, who is going to be around the body at line 410. They packed behind their shields, ringing again Patroclus around, and Ajax is going to scream, no one back away from the body. No heroes either bolting out of the Argive pack for single combat. Cluster around Patroclus, shoulder to shoulder. Fight them at close range, right? And we're told so many bodies are tumbling, corpses are tumbling down on top of the body of Patroclus. Friend defending friend from headlong slaughter, right? We then have that line about the tug of war. So at line 450, all day long the men of the war, and this is still the longest day, by the way, fighting, ragged, grim and grueling, relentless, drenching labor nonstop in the neat shins and feet that upheld each fighter, their hands, their eyes, ran with the sweat of struggle over the great runner Achilles' steadfast aid in arms, an enormous tug of war. When you use that term, tug of war, you are using an Iliad term, right? That's a fascinating simile too. Like when you're stretching out leather, that's the stretch, right? Not even Ares, lasher of armies, not even Athena watching the battle here could scorn its fury. Not even in their most savage lust for combat, no. So tends the work of war for the men and chariot teams that Zeus stretched out taunt across Patroclus this one day. Line 466, but great Achilles knew nothing yet of Patroclus' death. We're reminded, oh yeah, he doesn't know.